They missed it. Every single one of them, the most important moment of my life. And not one empty chair had my last name on it. I remember standing there in full dress uniform, the weight of the metal already pressing into my chest before it even touched the fabric. Cameras flashing, hands clapping. My commanding officer calling my name like it meant something bigger than me. And all I could see past the polished rows of strangers, past the flags, past the ceremony, was a single row of seats that stayed empty. My seat wasn't empty. I was there. But theirs told the truth I had been avoiding for years. I had told them it mattered. Not everything about the mission, of course. That part was classified. But I had called my father 3 weeks earlier, standing outside a secure briefing room with the desert wind still clinging to my uniform. I remember pressing the phone tight to my ear, listening to it ring longer than it should have. When he picked up, his voice sounded distracted, like I had interrupted something more important. "Hey, Dad, I got something coming up, a recognition ceremony, stateside. They said family can attend." There was a pause, not the kind filled with emotion, the kind filled with calculation. "What kind of ceremony?" "I can't go into details, but it's a big deal, for my unit, for me." Another pause, then a sigh, soft but deliberate. "You chose this life, Hannah. You know we don't really understand all that military stuff." I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You don't have to understand it, just be there." He didn't say yes, he didn't say no, he said we'll see. That phrase had followed me my entire life like a shadow. I called my mother next. She picked up faster, her voice warmer but thinner somehow, like it had been worn down over the years. "Oh, honey, that sounds important." "It is," I said. "Can you come?" She hesitated. I could hear my father's voice faintly in the background, asking something about dinner. "I'll talk to your dad," she said softly. That meant no. My younger brother didn't even pretend. When I texted him, he replied an hour later with "got work, maybe next time." There had never been a next time. Still, I sent the details: date, time, location, dress code. I even added a note: "This one matters to me." I don't know why I thought that would change anything. The day of the ceremony arrived colder than I expected. Not in temperature, the base was warm, the sky clear, but in the way the air felt when I stepped outside my quarters that morning. Like something had already decided how the day would end, and I was just walking toward it. My uniform was pressed to regulation perfection. Every ribbon aligned, every crease sharp. I checked it twice then, a third time, not because it needed it, but because it gave me something to control, something predictable. My roommate Carter leaned against the doorway watching me adjust my collar. "You nervous?" she asked. I shook my head. "No." She smirked. "That's a lie." I allowed myself a small breath. Not about the ceremony. She studied me for a second longer than I liked. "They coming?" I didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. Carter nodded slowly. "Then today's not about them." I wanted to believe that. The auditorium was already filling when we arrived. Rows of chairs arranged with military precision. Families sitting close together, some dressed up like it was a graduation, others holding small flags or cameras. There was a low hum of pride in the room, the kind you could feel without hearing. I scanned the crowd once, then again. Nothing. No familiar faces, no last-minute arrivals, no one waving from the back like they almost missed it but made it anyway. Just strangers. I told myself it was fine, that I had expected this, that I had prepared for it. But preparation and reality are two very different things. The ceremony began with formalities. Speeches about service sacrifice duty. Words I had heard before, but today they landed differently. Today they felt heavier. Not because of what they meant, but because of who wasn't there to hear them. One by one names were called. Soldiers stepped forward. Families clapped louder for their own. Cameras flashed brighter when someone's son or daughter stood at attention. I watched a young private hug his mother after receiving his recognition. She cried openly, pressing her face into his shoulder like she had been holding that moment in for years. I looked away. When they called my name, the room shifted slightly. I could feel it. Not because I was special, but because the citation that followed carried weight. Captain Hannah Mercer, my commanding officer, began, his voice steady and authoritative. For exceptional leadership under high-risk operational conditions. The words continued, detailing pieces of a mission I knew by heart, but could never fully speak about. decisions made in seconds, risks calculated in silence, lives balanced on choices no one should have to make alone. I stepped forward. My boots echoed louder than I expected against the polished floor. I kept my eyes straight ahead. Not on the seats. Not on the empty row. But I felt it anyway. The absence. The quiet where their voices should have been. The space where my father's approval never lived. The metal was pinned to my uniform with practiced precision. My commanding officer met my eyes for a brief second, just long enough to say what words couldn't. "You did your job. You did it well." The room applauded. I nodded, saluted, turned. Professional, controlled, exactly as I had been trained. But as I walked back to my seat, the sound of applause shifted in my ears. It became distant, hollow, like it belonged to someone else's life. I sat down, hands resting on my knees, back straight, face neutral. No one next to me leaned in to whisper, "We're proud of you." No one reached for my hand. No one said my name. The ceremony ended 20 minutes later. Families rushed forward, surrounding their loved ones with hugs, laughter, pictures. The room filled with warmth I could see but not feel. Carter found me near the exit. "You good?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah." Another lie. She didn't push. She just stood there for a moment, then gave my shoulder a light squeeze before stepping away to find her own people. I walked out alone. The sun hit my face as I stepped outside, brighter than it had any right to be. For a second, I just stood there, letting the noise of the auditorium fade behind me. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out. For a brief, stupid moment, something inside me hoped. Maybe they came late. Maybe they were outside. Maybe it was a notification. A bank alert. I stared at the screen for a second longer than necessary, then locked it and slipped it back into my pocket. Of course. I took a slow breath, then another. And that's when it settled. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just clarity. I had spent years trying to earn something that was never going to be given. And standing there in uniform, decorated, recognized, I realized something that should have been obvious all along. I was enough without them. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. People like my father believe they understand risk. They talk about it in terms of money investments, the kind of losses you can measure on paper and recover with time. But real risk, the kind that doesn't wait, the kind that doesn't negotiate, feels different. It has a sound, a pressure, a moment where everything narrows down to a single decision and you don't get a second chance to make it right. The mission had started as routine, at least on paper. A downed U.S. pilot in a contested region of the Middle East. Coordinates uncertain. Hostile presence confirmed. Recovery window limited. The kind of situation that gets briefed in calm voices around a table like it's just another line item. I was the one assigned to lead the extraction team. Not because I was the most senior. Not because I asked for it, but because I had a reputation one I never tried to build for making decisions under pressure without freezing. Mercer, my commanding officer, had said during the briefing, tapping the map with a pen, "You're on point. We don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect intel. You'll adapt as you go." Adapt. That word carries more weight than people think. We deployed under cover of darkness. The rotors cut through the night air with a steady, controlled rhythm, but inside the aircraft everything felt tighter, focused. No wasted movement. No unnecessary words. Across from me, Sergeant Lewis checked his gear for the third time. "You ever notice," he muttered, not looking up, "how they always say, high probability, like it's supposed to make you feel better?" I allowed myself the smallest hint of a smile, only when it's not your name on the line. He glanced up, then meeting my eyes. "Tonight it is." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. When we touched down, the world shifted from controlled to chaotic in a matter of seconds. Sand kicked up around us, reducing visibility. Comms crackled with fragmented updates. The pilot's last known position was close, but not precise. "Team Alpha move," I ordered, my voice steady through the headset. We advanced in formation, each step calculated, each movement deliberate. The kind of coordination that only comes from training together long enough to trust each other without question. We found the pilot faster than expected. That should have been a good sign. It wasn't. He was conscious barely, injured but alive. Propped against what remained of his aircraft, breathing shallow, his flight suit torn at the shoulder. "Captain Mercer," he rasped when he saw me approach. I nodded. "You're coming home." Those words carry a promise, one I don't make lightly. We secured him, stabilized what we could in the field, and signaled for extraction. The plan was simple: get in, get out, minimal engagement. But plans don't survive contact. The first shot came from our flank, sharp, unmistakable. "Contact left," Lewis shouted. Everything accelerated. Return fire, movement, adjustments. The kind of chaos that looks random from the outside but follows a pattern if you've been in it long enough. "Bird inbound in 5" came over comms. 5 minutes? In that environment, 5 minutes is a lifetime. We shifted positions using what little cover we had. The pilot's condition was deteriorating. Every second mattered. Then came the moment. "Mercer, we need to pull back," Lewis said, his voice tight but controlled. "They're closing in." He wasn't wrong. The safe call, the correct call by protocol, was to withdraw, mark the position, return with heavier support. But the pilot wouldn't make it that long. I looked at him, really looked. Blood loss, shock, fading consciousness. If we left, we were leaving him to die. "Negative," I said. Lewis's head snapped toward me. "Ma'am." "We move now," I cut in. "We're not leaving him." There are decisions that define you, not in the moment but in the consequences that follow. This was one of them. We shifted our formation, tightened our perimeter, and moved toward the extraction point ahead of schedule. It wasn't clean. It wasn't controlled. It was calculated risk, pushing the edge of what we could manage without breaking. The helicopter came in hot. Dust, noise, pressure. "Go, go, go," I ordered. Lewis and another soldier loaded the pilot first. I stayed on the ground a second longer than I should have, covering their movement. That's when I heard it, a sharp intake of breath behind me. Private Ellis. He had taken a hit. Not fatal, but bad enough to slow him down. "Move," I shouted, grabbing his vest and pulling him toward the aircraft. Rounds hit the ground around us, kicking up dirt and stone. We made it. Barely. The doors slammed shut as the helicopter lifted the ground, dropping away beneath us in a blur of motion and noise. Inside, everything shifted again. From chaos to aftermath. Medics moved quickly, stabilizing both the pilot and Ellis. Lewis sat across from me, breathing heavier than he'd admit. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then he looked at me, shaking his head slightly. "That wasn't by the book." "No," I said. A pause. "But it worked." I didn't answer. Because working comes with a cost. Back at base, the reports were filed, the decisions reviewed, the outcomes analyzed. I was called in for debrief. "You deviated from protocol," my commanding officer said, his tone neutral. "Yes, sir." "You understand the risk that posed to your team?" "I do." He studied me for a long moment. "And you'd make the same call again?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." Another pause. Then a slow nod. "That's what I thought." The pilot survived. Ellis recovered. The mission was classified as a success. And somewhere along the line, someone decided it was worth recognizing. Not the decision itself, not the moment, but the outcome. That's how it works. You don't get recognized for what you risk. You get recognized for what you bring back. Back home, none of that mattered. When I tried to explain carefully, vaguely, within the limits of what I was allowed to say, my father's response was the same as always. "You're making it sound more dramatic than it is." I remember standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at nothing. "I'm not," I said quietly. He sighed. "Hannah, people have dangerous jobs everywhere. You're not the only one." Number. But I was the one who had been there. The one who had to decide. The one who had to live with it. "I'm not asking you to understand everything I said, just some of it." There was a pause. "Then we'll talk about it another time." We never did. And that's the thing about moments like that mission. They don't leave you. Not completely. They stay with you in small ways. In the way you assess a room. In the way you notice exits. In the way silence feels heavier than it used to. My family never saw that version of me. They never asked. And eventually, I stopped offering. The morning it happened didn't feel like anything special. No warning, no build-up, no dramatic shift in the air. Just another early wake-up on base, the kind where your body moves before your mind fully catches up. I swung my legs off the bed, the floor cool under my feet, and reached automatically for my phone. Notifications, emails, routine. And then I saw it. A message from Carter. Check the news, now. No emojis, no explanation. Just that. I frowned slightly, still half in that quiet space between sleep and awareness, and tapped open the browser. The homepage loaded slowly, the connection lagging just enough to stretch the moment. Then it appeared. At the top. Front and center. A photograph I recognized immediately but had never seen from that angle before. Me. Standing beside the helicopter uniform dusted with sand helmet tucked under my arm, eyes focused somewhere beyond the frame. It wasn't a posed image. It wasn't polished. It was real, raw. And beneath it the headline, U.S. officer leads high-risk mission to rescue downed pilot. Published by the New York Times. For a few seconds I just stared. Not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because I did. Too well. They had released part of the mission. Not everything, not the full context, but enough to tell a story, enough to turn a series of decisions made in the dark into something visible, something public. I scrolled slowly. Details I recognized stripped down and translated into something civilians could digest. Words like bravery, leadership, decisive action under fire. Words that sounded distant, like they belonged to someone else. My name appeared 3 times in the article. Each time it felt less familiar. I didn't feel proud. Not the way I thought I would. Instead, there was this strange, quiet detachment. Like watching your own life from a distance, knowing the version people were seeing wasn't the one you lived through. My phone buzzed again. Then again. Messages started coming in from people I hadn't heard from in months. Former classmates, old neighbors, even a distant cousin I barely remembered. Just saw you in the news. So proud of you. This is incredible. I responded where I could. Short replies, polite acknowledgements. Thank you. Appreciate it. Means a lot. It didn't. Not in the way it should have. Because the only messages I was waiting for weren't there. I kept checking anyway. Every few minutes, refreshing the screen like it might change if I just gave it enough time. Nothing. No missed calls. No texts. No acknowledgement. By midday, the story had spread. Local outlets picked it up. Military channels shared it internally. Even the base commander stopped me in the hallway. Mercer, he said, offering a firm nod. Good work. Thank you, sir. You represented us well. I held his gaze steady, professional. I did my job. He studied me for a second like he was trying to read something beneath the surface. Then he gave a small approving nod and moved on. Carter found me later in the break room leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched. You're trending, she said, holding up her phone. I wish people wouldn't say that like it's a good thing. She raised an eyebrow. Most people would kill for this. Most people don't know what it actually cost. She didn't argue. Instead, she leaned beside me, her voice softer now. They call yet. I didn't look at her, no. A pause. They will. I didn't answer. Because deep down I already knew how this worked. Silence wasn't an oversight. It was a pattern. By late afternoon, the noise started to settle. Messages slowed. The initial wave of attention began to fade into something quieter. More manageable. I went back to my quarters, closing the door behind me with a soft click that felt louder than it should have. The room was still. Familiar. Safe. I set my phone on the table and walked to the window, staring out at the base as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Long shadows stretched across the ground, softening the edges of everything. For a moment I let myself imagine something different. What it would have felt like if my father had called that morning. If his voice had sounded proud. If my mother had cried just a little hearing my name on the news. If my brother had sent something more than a half-hearted message. Just once. Just enough to make it real. The phone buzzed again. I turned slowly, not rushing this time, not letting myself hope too quickly. I picked it up. A new message. From Dad. I stared at his name on the screen longer than I should have. Then I opened it. Family dinner 7 p.m., don't be late. That was it. No mention of the article. No acknowledgement of what had happened. No, I saw you. No, I'm proud of you. Just an instruction. A time. A command wrapped in something that pretended to be normal. I read it again. and again, waiting for something hidden between the lines. There was nothing. A slow, familiar feeling settled in my chest, not sharp like anger, not heavy like sadness. Just clarity. They hadn't missed the story. They hadn't overlooked it. They had seen it. And this was their response. Control. Routine. An attempt to pull everything back into the version of reality where nothing had changed. Where I was still the daughter who showed up when told. Where my life, no matter how far it stretched beyond them, still bent back toward their expectations. I set the phone down carefully like it might break if I moved too quickly. Then I sat. Quiet. Still. Letting the moment settle. For years I had told myself that if I just did enough, achieved enough, proved enough, something would shift. They would see me differently. They would meet me where I stood. But sitting there in that quiet room with my name still echoing somewhere out in the world, I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to accept. This wasn't about what I did. It never had been. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Carter. You going? I looked at the screen. Then at the message from my father. 7 p.m. Don't be late. I leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, my eyes drifting back toward the window. The light had changed. Softer now. Darker. Like the day was closing in on itself. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the pull to answer right away. I didn't feel the need to explain. Or justify. Or adjust. I just sat there holding the silence. And somewhere in that silence, something shifted. Not loud. Not dramatic. But permanent. I arrived at 7:02. Not because I was running late. Because I chose not to rush. The house looked exactly the same as it always had. Same white siding. Same neatly trimmed lawn my father insisted on maintaining himself like control over grass could somehow translate into control over everything else. The porch light was on. It always was. A signal maybe that this place was still supposed to feel like home. I stepped inside without knocking. The smell hit me first, roasted chicken garlic, something warm and familiar. It should have felt comforting. It didn't. Voices drifted in from the dining room. Normal voices. Casual. Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't stood on the front page of a national newspaper that morning. Like they hadn't missed the one moment I had asked them clearly directly not to miss. My father was already seated at the head of the table when I walked in. He glanced up briefly, checking the time on the wall clock behind me before his eyes settled on my face. You're late. 2 minutes. I pulled out a chair without responding and sat down. My mother offered a small smile from across the table, her hand still resting near the serving dish. Hi, honey. Hi, Mom. My brother barely looked up from his phone. Hey. That was it. No one said anything about the article. No one mentioned the ceremony. No one acknowledged anything beyond the fact that I had entered the room. My father picked up his fork, cutting into his food with precise, controlled movements. So he said, as if we were continuing a conversation from earlier that day, You've been busy. I watched him for a second before answering. I have. He nodded once. That's good. Silence settled over the table, thick but familiar. The kind of silence that had defined most of my childhood, where things that mattered weren't said, and things that didn't took their place. My brother cleared his throat. I've got a presentation next week, he said, glancing up briefly. Big client. Could be a promotion if it goes well. My father's attention shifted immediately. That's what I like to hear. You've been putting in the work. Yeah, he said, a small smile forming, finally paying off. My mother chimed in softly. We're very proud of you. I looked down at my plate. Of course they were. I let the moment pass without comment. The conversation continued around me, moving easily from one topic to another, work, finances, plans for the weekend. I listened, responding when necessary, keeping my tone, even my expressions, controlled. From the outside, it probably looked normal. A family dinner. Nothing more. Nothing less. And maybe that was the point. Halfway through the meal, my father set his fork down and leaned back slightly, his gaze shifting back to me. There is something we need to discuss, he said. I met his eyes. Okay. He folded his hands together on the table. I spoke with someone today. A contact. He mentioned that with your Recent visibility, there might be opportunities. I didn't react. What kind of opportunities, I asked. Connections, he said. Introductions. People who could benefit from knowing someone in your position. There it was. Not pride. Not curiosity. Utility. I'm not a networking tool, I said calmly. His expression didn't change. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm saying this could be beneficial for all of us. For all of us, I repeated. My brother leaned in slightly. It's not a bad idea, Hannah. I mean, if you've got access to certain circles. I cut in, and even if I did, that's not how this works. My father's jaw tightened just slightly. You're being defensive. I'm being clear. He exhaled slowly like he was trying to maintain patience. Family comes first. I felt something shift inside me then. Not a surge. Not an explosion. Just a quiet, precise alignment of thoughts that had been building for years. Funny, I said, my voice steady. You remembered that now. The room stilled. My mother's hands paused mid-motion. My brother looked up fully for the first time. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. It means I said you didn't say that when I asked you to come to the ceremony. No one spoke. I continued. I called you. I told you it mattered. I asked you to be there. My father shifted in his chair. We've been over this. You know we don't. You didn't even try, I said, still calm. You didn't ask questions. You didn't show up. You didn't call afterward. My mother's voice came softly, almost pleading. Honey, we didn't realize it was. I told you it was important, I said, turning to her briefly. That should have been enough. Silence. Thicker now. Heavier. My father leaned forward, his tone sharpening. We're here now. I held his gaze. Yes, I said, you are. Another pause. Then I added quietly, but you weren't there. The words settled over the table like something tangible. My brother shifted uncomfortably. Look, maybe this doesn't need to be a whole thing. It's already a whole thing, I said, not looking at him. I turned back to my father. You asked me to be here tonight. I came. Not because you told me to, but because I needed to understand something. His expression hardened. And what's that? Whether anything had changed. Another silence. Longer this time. Then he said, You're overreacting. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. I stood in a room full of people who didn't know me. I said, my voice still controlled, still even. And they recognized what I did. They respected it. They showed up. I let that sit for a second before continuing. You didn't miss a dinner, I said. You missed me. That was the moment. The one where everything shifted. The room went completely still. No clinking of silverware. No movement. Just the weight of what had been said hanging in the air. My mother looked down at her hands. My brother leaned back, exhaling slowly. And my father, for the first time in a long time, didn't have an immediate response. I pushed my chair back slightly and stood. I'm not here to argue, I said. And I'm not here to fix this tonight. My father finally spoke, his voice lower now. Then why are you here? I looked at him. Really looked at him. Not as a daughter trying to earn approval, but as someone seeing him clearly for the first time. I'm here, I said, to decide what I'm not willing to carry anymore. And with that, I stepped away from the table. No slammed doors. No raised voices. Just a quiet exit that said more than anything I could have added. The air outside felt different. Not lighter, not easier. Just clearer. I stood on the front steps for a moment, letting the door close quietly behind me. No one followed. No one called my name. Inside the house went on plates, voices the familiar rhythm of a family that knew how to continue, without ever truly confronting anything. For years I would have stayed. Sat back down, smoothed things over, adjusted my words, my tone, my expectations just enough to keep the peace. Just enough to stay connected to something that never quite connected back. But something had changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Just enough. I walked to my car, the gravel crunching softly under my boots. The night air carried a faint chill, the kind that settles into your skin without asking permission. I didn't rush. There was nowhere I needed to be except away. When I got inside, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel, eyes unfocused, replaying the evening, not the words, but the spaces between them, the pauses, the way my father had leaned forward when he wanted something, the way my mother had lowered her gaze when things became uncomfortable, the way my brother had tried to steer the conversation back to something easier. Patterns. Clearer now than they had ever been. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down. A message from my mother. "You didn't have to leave like that." I read it once, then again. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to respond immediately. I didn't feel the need to explain why I left or soften the impact of it. Because I hadn't left in anger. I had left in clarity. I set the phone back down. A minute later, it buzzed again. This time, my father. "We're not finished talking." I let out a quiet breath, something close to a laugh, but without the humor. We had never really started talking. Not in the way that mattered. I picked up the phone, stared at the message, and for a moment I considered all the ways I could respond. The versions of myself I had been before, each one ready to engage, to argue, to defend. Instead, I typed, "I am." I hit send before I could second-guess it. The reply didn't come right away, and that was fine. I started the engine. The drive back to base was quiet. No music, no distractions, just the steady hum of the road and the rhythm of my thoughts settling into something more structured, more defined. By the time I reached the gate, I felt steady. Not resolved, but aligned. Carter was still up when I got back. Her door was open, a soft light spilling into the hallway. She looked up as I passed, reading my expression before I said anything. "You went," she said. "I did." She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed loosely, and I paused in the doorway, considering how to answer. "They didn't ask about the article," I said. Her brow lifted slightly, not even once. I shook my head. A beat. And I think that told me everything I needed to know. Carter studied me for a second longer, then nodded slowly. "So what now?" That question used to feel overwhelming. Tonight it didn't. Now I said I stop expecting them to be something they're not. She tilted her head. "That sounds simple." "It's not," I said, "but it's necessary." She nodded again, more firmly this time. "Yeah, it is." I gave her a small, genuine smile, one that didn't feel forced or performative, and continued down the hall to my room. Inside, everything was exactly where I had left it. Uniform jacket draped over the chair, boots lined up near the door, the quiet order of a life built on discipline and routine. I took off my jacket, slowly hanging it up with care. The metal caught the light for a brief second before settling into stillness against the fabric. I stepped back and looked at it. Not as something to prove. Not as something to show. Just as something that was mine. Earned. Understood. Carried. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at it from across the room. Another message from my mother. "We're proud of you, we just don't always know how to say it." I stood there for a moment, letting the words settle. They weren't nothing. But they weren't everything either. For years I would have taken that message and built something bigger around it, filled in the gaps, translated the silence into something softer, something easier to accept. Tonight I didn't. I walked over, picked up the phone and typed, "I understand." And that was it. No more. No less. Because understanding didn't mean accepting the same pattern again. It meant seeing it clearly and choosing differently. Over the next few days, things shifted in small, subtle ways. My father didn't call. My brother sent a short message about his presentation going well. My mother checked in once, asking if I was eating enough, if I was sleeping. Normal things. Surface things. And for the first time, I met them at that level. I didn't push deeper. I didn't offer more than what was given. Not out of punishment, but out of balance. At work, life continued as it always did. Briefings, training, quiet conversations in hallways that carried more weight than they seemed to. The article faded from headlines, replaced by the next story, the next name. That was expected. Recognition is temporary. What stays is what you build after it. A week later, I was back in the field for a training exercise. Early morning, cold air, the kind that sharpens your focus. We moved through the drill with precision, each step practiced, each decision measured. At one point, we paused near the edge of a clearing, waiting for the next instruction. Louis stepped up beside me, adjusting his gear. "You ever think about going back?" he asked casually. "Back where?" He shrugged. "Home, for real." I considered that for a second. Then I said I don't think I ever really left, not in the way that matters. He glanced at me. "That sounds complicated." "It's not," I said, "it's just different now." He nodded slowly, accepting that without needing more explanation. A few minutes later, the exercise resumed. Movement, focus, purpose. The things that had always made sense to me. That night back in my room, I sat by the window again. The same view, the same quiet. But it didn't feel the same. Not because anything around me had changed, but because I thought about the years I had spent trying to earn a place at a table that never quite made room for me. The adjustments, the compromises, the quiet ways I had minimized myself just to stay connected. And I realized something simple. I wasn't asking for too much. I was asking the wrong people. I leaned back, slightly exhaling slowly, the tension in my shoulders easing in a way I hadn't noticed before. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting. Not for a call. Not for approval. Not for something to shift outside of me. I had already done that work. And it was enough. I spent years trying to earn a seat at their table. Turns out, I already had a place where I was seen. If you've ever felt overlooked by the people who were supposed to know you best, I'd really like to hear your story. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. There are more like this, and we're just getting started.